What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Playbook Sports Podcast. This is Nate coming at you guys with another NFL video. This time, though, I appreciate everybody for watching all the mock drafts, and there'll be another one coming out shortly after the Super Bowl. But today I want to take a shot at the other part of the offseason, the other huge part of the offseason, and that is free agency. There are a ton of good players going to be available. Let's get into who I think the best 10 are, along with some honorable mentions. Before we get into today's video, guys, I just want to give a special shout out to today's sponsors, starting with Goldfine and Bowles, lawyers for the injured. Personal injury, workers' compensation, those are their two things, but any sort of legal advice, they're the people to call. Give them a phone call, 309-673-5144. Tell them we sent you, okay? And I'd also like to shout out SeatGeek for sponsoring today's video as well. Use promo code PlaybookSports on their website to get $20 off your first purchase of $30 or more. Let's get back to the video. So I'm going to start with the honorable mentions list. And as you guys see here to my left, there is one player at the very top of that list whose name is bigger than the rest, and that's Jalen Johnson, cornerback from Chicago. The only reason he makes the honorable mention list and not the top 10, which is where he belongs, is because I do not foresee him getting into free agency. There's no way the Bears let him leave the building. There's no way they even allow it to be entertained. Way too good. Still very, very young. One of the best corners in the league. At worst case scenario, Chicago Bears fans, he is a franchise tag candidate. No question about it. Going down my list that I have here. Next up, I got Baker Mayfield listed as an honorable mention. He had a good year, right? He had a good year. Definitely had the best year of his entire NFL career this past season, I would say. Led the Bucs on a decent, very improbable playoff run. Won a game against the Eagles before ultimately losing to the Lions. But he wants $40 million a year. That's just a little bit too much, at least for me. That would move him down my free agent rankings. I just don't want to pay for one season, right? He was number one overall pick in 2018, I believe it was, and he just now had his best year. He's going to be looking to cash in. I would love to see him do it again. It was his best year, but it wasn't a very fantastic year. It wasn't anything that blew my top, you know what I mean? It wasn't the craziest year we've ever seen or anything, so he's just on the honorable mention list, at least for me at this point in time. Tyron Smith, left tackle from the Dallas Cowboys. He makes my honorable mention list. Stud left tackle. Definitely going to be a Hall of Famer one day, in my opinion. He's been fantastic. Unfortunately, he's 33 years old with a significant injury history. Teams are going to want to stay away from that. He's a one-year deal kind of guy, in my opinion, a plug-and-play fella. If the team like the Jets don't get the tackle they want in the first round, I could see him going to the Jets on a one-year deal. Just try your best to stay healthy, kid. But he's a stud. Let's not sugarcoat it. On here also, I've got Calvin Ridley, wide receiver, coming off, honestly, an okay season in Jacksonville. 29 years old, probably going to get a pretty decent 2-year deal, in my opinion. I just like the guys on my top 10 list a little bit better than him. I wouldn't pay him to be a number one wide receiver, and that may be the money he's looking for. We'll find out as we go. Next on my list, I got Robert Hunt. I think he's the best available guard in free agency this year, only 27 years old. Very limited injury history. He's a very, very solid player. But guards just don't make the ton of money. They're not the splashy signings, much like these other two guys I've got listed on here. They're just not super valued positions, but they are the best at their position in the free agency class this year. Follow that up with Patrick Queen. Undervalued position, definitely, as a linebacker. But very, very good linebacker. Worked great in tandem with with Roquan Smith all season. He'll get a decent amount of money to be a starter somewhere, maybe even in Miami for my Dolphins. With the Anthony Weaver moving over, I do know Patrick Queen and him got along really well. Patrick Queen saying he would love to come with him and play with him wherever he goes, so who knows. And then Saquon Barkley. Guys, we all know running backs don't get paid. There's no point in putting him in the top 10. He's not going to get any money at all out of this, sadly. A couple-year deal probably. Still very, 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 very good. But I just am not going to put him in my top 10 free agents when there are some top talent players at premium positions. All right, I'm going to start at number 10. We're going to go from 10 to 1 here. Number 10, I've got edge rusher Chase Young coming into free agency technically from 49ers. His production has been not what you expect from the number 2 overall pick. His best year was his rookie year, no doubt about it. This year, though, he was a lot better this year. Picked up 7.5 total sacks between Washington and San Francisco. You're signing this guy because of what he can be, not because of what he's done. He's got a serious injury history, yes. He's going to be 25 years old, guys. He is still young. Chase Young. You're signing him because of what he could do for you, and you're going to get him at a discount because he has not put up the flashy gaudy sack numbers we all thought he would. I mean, this guy coming out was considered to be on par. He was a better prospect than the Bosa brothers, and we all know how good those guys are at football. So some team's going to get him for a sweet deal, probably about 1 year, $13-15 million range would be my guess. Just sort of a prove-it deal for him. It'd be smart for both parties, in my opinion. Just get 1 year, show everybody what you got. I think the Niners ultimately get him back. I'm not doing this to try and predict where players are going to go. I like to predict contracts. I like to look at how much money this player should be worth on the open market. If you're interested in baseball, if you're a baseball fan at all, go to our website, www.playbooksportspodcast.com. Last July, I believe it was, I wrote an article about Shohei Ohtani and the contract I thought he was going to get, and I said 10 years, $700 million. That's the contract he got. I'll link it in the description below. Go give our website a check if you'd like to. I need to update it. Sorry, it's a little outdated. I'll work on it. But Chase Young, number 10. Number 9, Mike Evans, wide receiver out of Tampa Bay. What's that, another 1,000-yard season for Mike Evans? That's nothing for him. That's his 10th straight time doing that. That is crazy. He is Mr. Consistency. Every season he's played at least 15 games except for 1 year where he played 13 games, so he stays on the field. Initially when I saw he's a free agent, I'm like, oh, that's a great get. That's a great get for some team is to get Mike Evans. Unfortunately, he's looking for $25 to $30 million a year in a deal. That is a chunk of change for an older wide receiver. He's 30 years old currently. He definitely deserves his money. I just don't think I would personally give him a ton of money. I could see the Bucs maybe wanting to bring him back, but I like, there's a couple of places I like the fit at, and ultimately I go with the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs need a sure-handed pass catcher. That's Mike Evans. He's on the field all the time. That's Mike Evans. Best abilities, availability, Mike Evans. They're in the Super Bowl right now. It obviously hasn't been played yet as I'm recording this on February 3rd, but it's coming up. The Chiefs need a good wide receiver. They have Rashee Rice, who's been awesome. Maybe they target one in the draft, but they are a Super Bowl team for the foreseeable future. That isn't going to change. Why not bring in a sure-handed guy like Mike Evans for 3 years? I've got him signing for 3 years, $70 million, right under the $25 million a year. His contract that he wants, hypothetically, at 25 to 30, puts him in the Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp range. I just don't see that. They all signed those deals younger than Mike Evans as well. He is the oldest. He would be the oldest of those other 3 receivers to get that kind of money, and I just don't see that happening. I like him. I like him in Indy. If Indy decides not to go with Pittman, not to re-sign Pittman, which would be foolish in my opinion. I like Pittman a lot. But I ultimately peg him going to the Chiefs, about 3 years, $70 million. Next up, big Christian Wilkins, my man, Big Wilk. Him and Zach Sealer, salt and pepper. I absolutely love him. Stud interior defensive lineman. He broke the record for most tackles by a defensive tackle in 2022. This one's hard for me because as a Dolphins fan, I see what Christian Wilkins is beyond the stats. He's a glue guy. He is a leader in the locker room. He is everybody's favorite. I mean, you see him jumping up and chest bumping Stephen Ross. Everybody loves Christian Wilkins. He played all 17 games last 3 seasons. This past season, 9 sacks, most for him in his career. And the Dolphins don't have a ton of depth at defensive tackle, but I can't look at this as a fan. I have to look at this from a business perspective. And unfortunately, the Dolphins just don't have a ton of money in cap. They can create a ton of money in cap, but you're just kicking the can down the road. Are you really going to pay a ton of money for a defensive tackle who does make some good plays, but he's not splashy? He's not splashy. And he's going to want about $20 million a year, and that's what I've got him signing for. He was drafted in the first round by Brian Flores. What team could really use a defensive tackle that has money to spend, that happens to have Brian Flores as defensive coordinator? Minnesota Vikings. And they desperately could use him. I see him signing with Minnesota. I've got him signing with the Vikings. About 4 years, $80 million, I think, is what Wilkins ultimately goes with. I don't think he's going to get like Chris Jones money. He's not going to be in that upper tier. Like, he shouldn't get Dexter Lawrence money either, in my opinion. But I still think $20 million a year will be about where he lands at, and the Vikings have the cap. Again, I'm not trying to predict teams. I'm mostly predicting contract, and I'm just throwing teams out there for fun. Next up, number 7. I've got Justin Madubuike coming off of a career year with the Baltimore Ravens. Proved himself to be one of the better interior defensive linemen in the NFL. The Ravens don't have a ton of salary cap right now. Only about $5 million available going into the offseason. Now, obviously, there are ways to move it around. Every team does it. They can always work magic on the cap, so that number isn't real. It will change, and after they juggle it, I bet you the Ravens really try to re-sign him because he was awesome. But I could also see him wanting to go with Mike McDonald out to Seattle. Seattle has a ton of money. Seattle has a serious need on the interior. And what better way for McDonald to start his defense out in Seattle than by bringing in his dominant interior defensive lineman in Matt. Even if the Ravens decide to pay him or tag him or whatever they decide to do with their money, I like him getting a 4-year, $82 million deal, slightly more than Christian Wilkins. Just because he's a little bit younger and he just had a little better of a season. So I've got him 4 years, $82 million, probably signing a day after Wilkins, just making sure he just outdoes him by $500,000 a year. And I think he goes to Seattle. Personally, I could see him going to Seattle. That's just my opinion. Next up, number 6, I've got L'Jarius Sneed, cornerback, Kansas City Chiefs. He is kind of a hard player to predict, at least in my opinion. I don't think he's the best corner available. I think that's Jalen Johnson. But the Chiefs are in a tough spot with their cap. They can't pay everybody. They almost let Chris Jones walk this past offseason because they couldn't pay him. And we'll more on Chris Jones later. But he has been rock solid, but just never the flashy player. If the Chiefs let Chris Jones walk, which we'll get more into later, I see him re-signing with the Chiefs. As well as his tags, I think this is also a very serious franchise tag situation. For Sneed, his franchise tag this offseason would be about $18 million. I think the Chiefs can make that happen. I think that's the most likely thing that happens, is L'Jarius Sneed back to the Chiefs on the franchise tag. However, if they allow him to test the waters in free agency, I think he tests them, and I think he goes swimming, and he swims right over to Philadelphia and joins the Eagles. Eagles have the cap space. They had atrocious cornerback play last year. Probably not going to address the position early in the draft, even though they should. But we all know Howie Roseman likes to take his offensive and defensive linemen. He only drafts trenches. So Sneed's a day one starter across from Darius Slay, who you're hoping to milk another year or two out of. This allows you to show Bradbury the door, get him out of Philadelphia. And he shouldn't be overly expensive. He's not going to get like the Jalen Ramsey money or the J.C. Jackson money, which was obviously a mistake. I'm predicting if he signs a long-term deal, I'm predicting a 4-year, $65 million deal for L'Jarius Sneed, be it to the Eagles or franchise tag and staying with the Chiefs. I think those are the two most likely options for L'Jarius Sneed. Number 5, I've got the top wide receiver available this offseason in my opinion. That is Mr. T. Higgins, coming out of Cincinnati. 25 years old, 6'4", 220 pounds. All the tools to be a number one wide receiver. The only reason he hasn't been used as one is because someone named Jamar Chase has been playing across the field from him. Bengals are in a tough spot with their cap. They just had to pay Burrow. I could see them maybe trying to tag Higgins and moving money around. They need help in other places. They have several holes that need to be filled and not a ton of money to do it. They're going to have to pay Jamar Chase soon. I think they have to let T. Higgins walk. You can't afford to pay a second wide receiver $25-30 million a year, and he's going to get some really good money. I've got him settling for about $20 million a year. I don't think he's going to get 25 to 30. Some people think he might. I just think that's too much money. I see a lot of teams trying to lowball him a little bit simply because of the production as a number 2. He doesn't have the numbers, and teams are going to want the numbers. I've got him signing a 4-year, $80 million deal with the Houston Texans. I like the Houston Texans as a fit for him. Texans are coming off of a surprise run to the playoffs. They've got the 4th most cap space in the NFL this offseason. They've got money to blow. If T. Higgins walks from the Bengals, I think Houston tries and calls him up. T. Higgins, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins as your 3 wide receivers in Houston. Ooh, baby. C.J. Stroud will be throwing that rock, and I would love to see that. So give me T. Higgins to Houston, which, I mean, that's not really what I'm about, but I think 4 years, $80 million feels right for him. Number 4, my top 4 free agents. Got 2 edge rushers, 3 defensive linemen, and a quarterback. Number 4, I'm going with Brian Burns here. Number 4. I've got him here. I feel like he's not being talked about enough. I like his game more than the next edge rusher I'll talk about, personally. I've been a fan of Brian Burns forever. Love him. He's only going to be 26 years old opening weekend, super consistent, and I could see him wanting out of Carolina. They're not a contending team. They didn't show any promise last season at all, and they don't have a first-round pick this year to try and fix things. They are in a very tough spot, and why waste your prime that he's just now entering on a non-contending team? Unfortunately for him, the Panthers can and will use the franchise tag on him, without a doubt. There's no way Brian Burns is allowed to walk out of there. I mean, he may hold out, and good for him if he does. He should do that and try and get to a better place. But I'm predicting franchise tag. But if he's allowed to walk, I love his fit with the Chicago Bears. I think he would be an awesome edge rusher to pair up with Montez Sweat. Good luck blocking both of those guys. You better have 2 fantastic tackles. because they would cause problems. If he were to sign a long-term deal, I foresee him getting about 5 years, $120 million, about 25, roughly 22 a year, roughly. Just under the next guy I'm going to talk about here. But I really do think that there's no way Carolina doesn't franchise tag him personally. Number 3, the other edge rusher I was talking about, Josh Allen, not the quarterback. The edge rusher out of Jaguars. I do think he's probably going to be rated as most people's top edge rusher in the free agency class. He's only 27 years old, just had 17.5 sacks for the Jags. He had an unbelievable season. This contract you sign him to will be throughout his prime. He's going to cash in, man. And I think that when you start looking at the contract for edge rushers, for him, I'm starting at Rashawn Gary's deal with the Packers. That's where I'm starting the price. I'm saying, listen, I just got you guys 17.5 sacks. You drafted me. I know you want to keep me. I went crazy. Someone's going to pay me stupid money. He should and will make more than Bradley Chubb does for Miami, and Chubb just had a great year before getting hurt. He should make more than Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary's getting $24 million a year. That's where I start. And I'm like, all right, well, this is the floor, $24 million, and it needs to be able to go up. I do think he goes over that, but I also think he will stay below TJ Watt's $28 a year, and he won't sniff Nick Bosa's $35 million a year. That's crazy. If the Jags, if he doesn't want to re-sign with the Jags, they will also franchise tag him, I'm sure. But I think, first of all, I would love Detroit as a fit for him if he's allowed to walk into free agency and actually test the waters a little bit. Him and Aiden Hutchinson across from each other would be terrifying. They would get so many sacks, and they desperately need more edge rushers. I bet they are praying for him to get to free agency. But I do feel like he might just stick around the Jags. They'll probably franchise him and then sign him to a long-term deal with a little extra time. But if he's allowed to get a long-term contract, if that's on the cards, I'm saying 5 years, $130 million feels right for him. Just an absolute bag, and he deserves it. He honestly deserves it. A little bit less than $30 million. I think it's about $26 million a year, roughly. $27 million a year. So he stays below TJ Watt. You can't argue he should get more than TJ Watt, in my opinion. But he will get more than Rashawn Gary, and he absolutely deserves that. Number 2, I'm going with the best free agent quarterback available. That is Mr. Kirk Cousins. Mr. Kirk Cousins. He was dominant last year before he got hurt. He was playing at an MVP level quarterback last year. He will be ready to go come week 1. His season was ended this past year with an Achilles injury. He will be ready to go week 1. Any team that needs a veteran quarterback that can and will throw for 4,000 plus yards, give you 25 to 35 touchdowns and about 10 interceptions, they will be calling him. If you don't have a top 3 pick in the draft, Denver might pick up the phone. Raiders might pick up the phone. Anybody in that middling ground who doesn't have a quarterback that they love should and will be on the phone with Kirk Cousins. Vikings are in kind of a weird spot, right, where they're too good to tank, but they're just maybe not good enough to go too far, right? If you let Cousins walk, you're committing to being a bad team next year, and good luck convincing Justin Jefferson to stick around long term when you do not keep a quarterback around to play with him. If you go into the year next year with Nick Mullins and Jaron Reed as your 2 quarterbacks, Justin Jefferson might get an ankle injury and just not play most of the year. How can you blame him? You can't blame him at all. Ultimately, I think that the Vikings have to make a move and have to sign him. I think he gets a 2-year, $85 million deal. $42.5 million a year. I think that's totally reasonable for 2 years. And watch it all be guaranteed, much like his most previous contract with them. This will be a fully guaranteed deal. 2 years, $85 million for Mr. Kirk Cousins. And that brings me to my top free agent in the NFL 2024 free agency class as of today, February 3rd. And it's obvious. It's Mr. Chris Jones from the Kansas City Chiefs. Any team that needs an interior defensive lineman, obviously this entire class looks really good. This will be my 3rd interior defensive lineman in my top 10. You're in luck this year, but Chris Jones is probably 2nd best defensive tackle in the NFL behind Aaron Donald, and you could argue they're pretty dang close. And there's other ones in there, but Chris Jones is so good. Funny how Kansas City lost to Detroit and immediately called him up and said, all right, let's work this out. We need you back. We need you bad. Chiefs really shouldn't let him walk. They finally have an elite defense, and he is a massive part of that elite defense. But they're going to be in a tough spot. And they may be coming off another ring with low cap space, and it's like, all right, listen, you've won us a couple rings. Go ahead and go get a big old bag of cash from somebody. And a team that has plenty of cap space and could use someone on the interior that may or may not have already signed Higgins. Houston Texans. Guys, they have so much money. They are building something over in Houston. I'm a believer. They look dang good this season and in the playoffs against Cleveland. They look fantastic. I love what D'Amico Ryans is doing. You plot Chris Jones right there in the middle of that defensive line. It allows you to go other places with your first pick in the draft. You don't have to wait on somebody to develop. You're getting a top 10 player in the NFL, top 15 player in the NFL straight away in Chris Jones. Absolute monster. He's going to get $30 million a year. I'm predicting 3 years, $90 million with the Houston Texans, and the Texans are the big offseason spenders, at least according to this. There will be other people who get a ton of money too, obviously, that spend big money. But and maybe he doesn't go to Houston, but I do think he's going to get $30 million a deal, $30 million a year. Chiefs can't franchise tag him. It's $33 million to tag him this year. They cannot afford that without losing other talent in other places. They just can't. Chris Jones is a massive piece for them. I think if he wins them another ring, he'll probably price himself out of Kansas City. Personally, that's just my thought. So those are my top 10 free agents. And again, I want to end this video with a little caveat. Free agency is always so fun going into it because you're like, oh, this guy's going to go here and this person there. And 9 times out of 10, they just stay where they already are. You almost never see the big flashy moves where teams are like, yes, we're going all in. You never see an Ndamukong Suh to Miami. That just doesn't happen very often. J.C. Jackson to the Chargers a couple years ago. What a flop that was. Big free agency moves from player to a new team. More often than not, it seems like they really don't work. But it's always fun to predict them. And when 8 of these top 10 players re-sign with their team or are franchise tagged by their team and stay home, well, that's not fun to talk about, right? I could go through all these players and be like, oh yeah, staying. No, what's the point of that? That's boring. So I understand that this will probably be very, very wrong. I'm mostly looking at contract, money, years, all that good stuff. And then just throwing in the teams for fun, like I said. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you think about my top 10 free agents. I'm sure some people are going to be real pissed I didn't have Jalen Johnson in my top 10. Guys, he obviously should. He's a top 10 guy. There's just no way he's not getting tagged. I'm sorry. There's no way he's not getting tagged. Similarly to Brian Burns, but I could also see him forcing his way out, too. Jalen Johnson's not going to force his way out of Chicago. Ryan Poles is going to re-sign him. He's not going anywhere. So please don't yell at me at the comments like I know you're all going to do. That's what I got for you guys for the free agents of 2024. Again, let me know what you think. Thank you guys for all the love and support on the last few videos on the channel. Hello to all of our new subscribers. Great to have you. Please stick around. Tell your friends. Come check us out. And if you guys like the NFL draft, I'll have another mock draft coming out in about a week's time from now. Just after the Super Bowl, I plan to release it. And then on the actual draft day, we will be going live here on YouTube. There will be a ton more to talk about this when we get there. We will be going live for the whole draft, all 4 of us live the whole time, breaking down every pick, giving you predictions, what we think, so on and so forth. It will be the draft spectacular of the year. You won't want to miss it. A lot more information coming out on that as we get closer and closer to it. So that's all I've got for you guys in this video. Have yourselves a good night and enjoy the Super Bowl.